The red velvet curtains of the London Palladium shimmered under the bright stage lights as Princess Catherine adjusted her elegant navy blue gown one final time. The royal variety show was always a grand affair, but tonight felt different somehow. She could sense it in the way the performers backstage kept stealing glances at her, in a nervous energy that seemed to crackle through the historic theater's corridors. Catherine had attended this prestigious event many times before, but as she sat in the royal box beside Prince William, her mind wandered to something far more personal than the spectacular performances unfolding before her. The secret she carried felt heavier tonight. Pressed against her heart, like a precious stone, she wasn't quite ready to reveal to the world. The show began with a dazzling display of acrobats spinning through the air, their sequined costumes catching the light as they defied gravity. Catherine applauded politely, her white gloves catching the reflection of the stage lights, but her thoughts kept drifting to the conversation she'd had with her personal secretary that morning. The timing wasn't right yet, she decided. The children weren't ready to hear what she needed to tell them. Prince George, now 11 years old, was finally settling into his role as future heir. He'd started asking more serious questions about royal duties and what would be expected of him as he grew older. Princess Charlotte, with her fierce independence and sharp wit, was navigating the complexities of being a royal daughter in the modern world. And little Prince Louis, still so young and carefree, deserved to hold on to his innocence a bit longer. A comedian took the stage, delivering jokes that had the audience roaring with laughter. Catherine smiled genuinely for the first time that evening, appreciating how humor could unite people across all social boundaries. It reminded her of why she'd fallen in love with her role in the royal family, the ability to connect with people from all walks of life, to bring comfort and joy when it was needed most. As the performance continued, Catherine's mind drifted to her childhood. Growing up in Bucklebury with her parents Michael and Carol Middleton, she lived a relatively normal life compared to what her own children experience now. She remembered lazy summer afternoons in the garden, helping her mother with ordinary household tasks, and the simple pleasure of anonymity when walking through the village. Those memories felt particularly poignant tonight because they were connected to the secret she carried. It wasn't something shameful or scandalous, quite the opposite actually, but it was deeply personal, something that would change how her children saw not just her, but themselves and their place in the world. The next act featured a young singer whose voice soared through the theater with remarkable power and emotion. Catherine found herself genuinely moved by the performance, thinking about how talent and passion could emerge from the most unexpected places. The girl couldn't have been much older than Charlotte, yet she commanded the stage with such confidence and grace. William leaned over and whispered something about the performer's technical skill, but Catherine was thinking about courage instead. It took tremendous bravery to stand alone on that vast stage, sharing something so personal with thousands of strangers. Perhaps that's what she needed, not a grand stage, but the quiet courage to share her truth with the three people who mattered most. The audience erupted in thunderous applause as the young singer took her bow. Catherine clapped enthusiastically, genuinely impressed by the girl's talent and poise. In that moment, she made a decision, not about when or how she would tell her children her secret, but about something else entirely. She would start keeping a journal again, something she hadn't done since her university days. She wanted to capture these feelings, these moments of uncertainty and reflection, so that someday, when her children were older and perhaps facing their own difficult decisions, they might understand the weight of choices that seemed simple from the outside. A dance troupe took the stage next, their movements fluid and synchronized as they told a story without words. Catherine watched, mesmerized by how they communicated such complex emotions through pure movement. It struck her that this was often how royal life worked, saying so much while speaking very little, conveying meaning through gestures and presence rather than explicit words. The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent so much of her public life being photographed and scrutinized, yet the most important conversations of her life happened in complete privacy. The secret she carried was exactly that kind of private truth, something that belonged first and foremost to her family, regardless of public interest or media speculation. As the evening progressed, Catherine found herself studying the faces in the audience below. There were families scattered throughout the theater, parents with children of various ages, all sharing this magical evening together. She wondered how many of those parents were carrying their own secrets, their own worries about timing and readiness when it came to sharing difficult truths with their children. The thought comforted her somehow. Parenthood, whether you lived in a palace or a terraced house, involved these same fundamental challenges. How do you protect your children's innocence while preparing them for reality? How do you know when they're ready for information that might change their perspective forever? A magician appeared on stage, performing illusions that defied logic and explanation. The audience gasped and laughed in equal measure, completely captivated by the impossible made real. Catherine smiled, thinking about how childhood itself was a kind of magic, a time when the impossible seemed perfectly reasonable and the world was full of wonder rather than worry. Her children still possessed that sense of wonder, though she could see it shifting as they grew older. George especially was beginning to ask more pointed questions about their family's role in British society and what would be expected of him in the future. She and William tried to answer honestly while still preserving his childhood, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to balance transparency with protection. The magician's final trick involved making a beautiful white dove appear from seemingly nowhere. The bird perched calmly on his outstretched hand before taking flight, circling the theater once before disappearing into the shadows above the stage. The audience erupted in amazed applause, and Catherine found herself thinking about freedom and choice, concepts that would feature prominently in the conversation she would eventually need to have with her children. During the interval, several performers approached the royal box to pay their respects. Catherine spoke with each of them warmly, asking about their backgrounds and their experiences in show business. She was particularly drawn to a young dancer who mentioned growing up in a small town and dreaming of performing on the London stage. "Dreams can take you to the most unexpected places," the girl said with genuine enthusiasm. "Sometimes where you end up is nothing like what you imagined, but it's exactly where you're supposed to be." Those words stayed with Catherine as the second half of the show began. She thought about her own journey from a middle-class family in Berkshire to becoming one of the most recognizable women in the world. Certainly, it hadn't been the life she'd imagined as a young girl, but she'd found purpose and meaning in ways she never could have anticipated. The final act of the evening featured an orchestra performing a medley of beloved British songs. As the familiar melodies filled the theater, Catherine felt a deep connection to the tradition and continuity that the Royal Variety Show represented. For over a century, this event had brought together the best of British entertainment while supporting those who needed help in the industry. It reminded her that her secret, when she finally shared it, would become part of her children's understanding of their own legacy. Not just the weight of royal responsibility, but the privilege of service and the importance of using their platform to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. As the evening drew to a close and the performers took their final bows, Catherine applauded with genuine appreciation for the talent and dedication she'd witnessed. The secret she carried felt lighter somehow, not because she was ready to share it, but because she'd gained clarity about why the timing mattered so much. Her children deserved to hear this truth when they could fully appreciate both its significance and its beauty. Until then, she would continue to protect their childhood while carefully preparing them for the conversation that would eventually come. 3 weeks after the Royal Variety Show, Catherine found herself in the familiar surroundings of Kensington Palace's private sitting room, watching her children work on their homework at the large oak table by the window. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug where Orla, their cocker spaniel, dozed contentedly. Prince George was struggling with a mathematics problem, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked through the calculations. Princess Charlotte had already finished her assignments and was sketching in the margins of her notebook, something that reminded Catherine painfully of herself at that age. Little Prince Louis was practicing his handwriting, tongue poking out slightly as he carefully formed each letter. The domesticity of the scene struck Catherine as both precious and fragile. These quiet moments together were becoming rarer as the children's schedules filled with more formal education and royal obligations. Soon, George would be starting at Eton College, following in his father's footsteps, but creating his own path through those historic halls. Catherine's secret pressed against her consciousness more urgently these days, not because external circumstances demanded revelation, but because she could see her children beginning to form their own ideas about identity, family, and what it meant to carry the weight of royal lineage. She wanted them to understand the complete picture before those ideas became too fixed in their minds. The telephone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her mother, calling from Bucklebury with updates about family preparations for an upcoming celebration. As Catherine spoke with Carol, she found herself watching her children's faces, noting how they'd inherited different features from various branches of both families. George had William's strong jawline, but her own thoughtful eyes. Charlotte possessed a fierce independence that reminded everyone of her late grandmother, Princess Diana, combined with Carol's practical sensibility. Louis had inherited the Spencer family's mischievous streak along with William's easy charm. After ending the call, Catherine joined her children at the table, helping George with his mathematics while listening to Charlotte's animated description of a history project about women's suffrage. The irony wasn't lost on Catherine that her daughter was researching women who'd fought for the right to shape their own destinies while living in a world where her future role was largely predetermined by birth order and tradition. "Mummy," Charlotte said suddenly, looking up from her research, "why didn't women have the same rights as men for such a long time?" Catherine paused, considering how to answer honestly without overwhelming her 9-year-old daughter with concepts that adults still struggled to navigate. "People sometimes hold on to old ways of thinking because change can feel scary," she said carefully. "But brave individuals throughout history have challenged those ideas when they realized they weren't fair or right." George looked up from his mathematics. "Are there things about our family that have changed over time, too?" The question caught Catherine off guard, not because she wasn't prepared for it, but because it struck so close to the heart of what she'd been contemplating. "Every family changes and grows," she said thoughtfully. "Sometimes those changes happen slowly, and sometimes they happen because people make brave decisions to do things differently." She realized she was approaching the edge of the conversation she wasn't quite ready to have. The children deserved complete honesty, but they also deserved age-appropriate timing. Her secret wasn't something that required immediate action, but it was something that would fundamentally change their understanding of their place in both the royal family and the broader world. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Catherine and William sat together in their private study, discussing the upcoming schedule of royal engagements and family commitments. But Catherine's mind kept returning to the afternoon's conversation and the questions that were beginning to emerge more frequently. "They're getting older," William said, as if reading her thoughts. "George especially is starting to understand more about what will be expected of him." Catherine nodded, thinking about the weight of hereditary responsibility and how it shaped every aspect of their children's development. But her secret wasn't about royal duty or constitutional monarchy. It was about something far more personal and, in its own way, more revolutionary. The next morning brought news that would accelerate Catherine's timeline, whether she felt ready or not. A journalist had been asking questions, making inquiries that came uncomfortably close to information that Catherine had thought was safely protected by time and discretion. She spent the morning in meetings with private secretaries and communication staff, discussing how to handle potential media interest while protecting her family's privacy. The conversations were professional and thorough, but they left Catherine feeling unsettled about the prospect of others telling her story before she had the chance to tell it herself. More importantly, she realized that external pressure might force the conversation with her children to happen before she felt they were truly ready. The thought of her secret becoming public knowledge before her own family fully understood it felt deeply wrong. That afternoon, Catherine made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of waiting for the perfect moment or ideal circumstances, she would begin preparing her children gradually for the truth she needed to share. Not through one dramatic revelation, but through smaller conversations that would build their understanding over time. She started with George, approaching him while he practiced piano in the music room. As his fingers moved across the keys, playing a piece by Chopin that his instructor had assigned, Catherine sat beside him on the bench. "You're getting quite good at that," she said, genuinely impressed by his progress. "Music has always been important in our family." George continued playing, but glanced at her curiously. "Did you play piano when you were young?" "I did," Catherine said, then added carefully, "though I learned in a very different environment than you're learning in now." She wasn't ready to elaborate further, but she wanted to plant seeds of understanding about the contrast between her childhood and his. Over the coming weeks, she planned to build on these small revelations, helping all three children understand the journey that had brought their family to where they were today. The following week brought the annual Christmas preparations, and Catherine found herself thinking about tradition and change as she helped the children select gifts for family members and staff. The palace was bustling with activity as decorations were hung and menus were planned for various holiday events. Charlotte had become particularly interested in the history behind their family's Christmas traditions, asking detailed questions about which customs dated back generations and which were more recent additions. Her curiosity provided natural opportunities for Catherine to introduce concepts about how families evolve and adapt while maintaining their core values. Some traditions stay exactly the same because they're perfect as they are, Catherine explained as they arranged ornaments on one of the smaller Christmas trees. Others change because families grow and learn new ways of celebrating together, like how we started having Christmas at Sandringham instead of Windsor. Charlotte asked, demonstrating her impressive grasp of recent family history. "Exactly," Catherine said, impressed by her daughter's observation. "Sometimes changes happen because of practical reasons, and sometimes they happen because people realize there might be a better way to do something." These conversations felt like progress, though Catherine knew she was still far from the complete revelation she would eventually need to make. Her secret wasn't scandalous or shameful, but it was significant enough to potentially change how her children understood their own identity and place in the world. As December progressed, Catherine noticed that all three children were becoming more curious about family history and asking more sophisticated questions about royal protocols and expectations. George, in particular, seemed to be processing the reality of his future responsibilities in new ways. During a quiet moment after a particularly formal family dinner, he approached Catherine with a question that caught her completely off guard. "Mummy, do you ever wish things had been different? Like, that you'd had a normal life instead of becoming a princess?" Catherine sat down beside him, recognizing that this was exactly the kind of moment she'd been both anticipating and dreading. Her secret was intimately connected to questions about choice, identity, and what constituted a normal life. "I've been very fortunate," she said carefully, "but everyone's path through life involves both wonderful opportunities and difficult sacrifices. The important thing is understanding why those choices were made and what they mean for the people we love most." George nodded thoughtfully, though Catherine could see he was processing complex ideas that would take time to fully understand. She realized that her gradual approach was working. The children were becoming more ready for deeper conversations about family, identity, and the choices that had shaped their lives. But time was running shorter than she'd hoped. The journalists' inquiries were becoming more persistent, and Catherine's communications team was advising that a proactive approach might be necessary sooner rather than later. That night, Catherine made another decision. She would tell William everything first, seeking his guidance about timing and approach. Her secret affected not just her relationship with their children, but the entire family's understanding of their history and future. The conversation would need to happen soon, but Catherine was finally beginning to feel confident that her children were developing the emotional maturity and intellectual curiosity necessary to handle the truth she'd been carrying for so long. The conversation with William took place on a cold January evening in their private study at Adelaide Cottage, after the children had gone to bed, and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet. Catherine had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times, but actually sitting across from her husband with the weight of revelation between them felt entirely different than she'd imagined. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "Something about my family history that I've kept private, even from you, because I thought it would be better to wait until the children were older." William set down his evening tea and gave her his complete attention, recognizing the gravity in her tone. After 15 years together, he could read her moods and expressions with remarkable accuracy, and he could see that whatever she was about to share carried significant weight. Catherine took a deep breath before continuing. "Before my father's business became successful, before we moved to the house in Bucklebury where you knew me to grow up, my family experienced genuine poverty. Not the romantic kind that people sometimes imagine, but real financial hardship that shaped everything about how we lived." She watched William's face carefully as she spoke, noting his surprise, but also his immediate attentiveness. This wasn't what he'd expected to hear, but she could see him already beginning to process the implications of what she was telling him. "When I was very young, probably around Lewis's age, we lived in a small flat in Reading where my parents worried constantly about making rent and putting food on the table. My father was working multiple jobs just to keep us afloat, and my mother was doing everything she could to create stability while managing her own fears about her future." Catherine had never spoken these words aloud to anyone outside her immediate family. The memories were vivid and sometimes painful, but they were also fundamental to understanding who she'd become and why certain values were so important to her. "I remember nights when my parents thought I was asleep, but I could hear them at the kitchen table going through bills and try to figure out how to make the numbers work. I remember my mother crying quietly sometimes, thinking no one could see her. I remember the shame I felt when other children at school had things that seemed impossibly luxurious to me." William reached for her hand, understanding instinctively that she was sharing something deeply personal and vulnerable. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked gently, without any judgment in his voice. "Because I was afraid," Catherine admitted, feeling relief at finally speaking the truth. "Afraid that it would change how you saw me, how your family saw me, how the public might respond if they knew that their future queen had once relied on government assistance and food parcels from local charities." The weight of that confession settled between them. Catherine had spent years worrying that her background would be seen as a liability rather than an asset, that people would question her suitability for royal life if they knew about the food insecurity and housing instability that had marked her earliest years. "But also," she continued, "I was afraid of how it might affect our children. George especially will face enough scrutiny about his background and preparation for future responsibilities. I didn't want to add another layer of complexity to his understanding of our family story." William was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she'd shared. When he finally spoke, his words surprised Catherine with their directness and clarity. "This doesn't change anything about who you are or what you mean to our family," he said firmly. "If anything, it makes me understand better why you connect so naturally with people from all backgrounds, why you're so passionate about issues affecting families in crisis." Catherine felt tears forming in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief at his immediate acceptance and understanding. She'd been carrying this secret for so long that she'd almost forgotten how it might feel to share the burden with someone who truly knew and loved her. "The children need to know," William continued thoughtfully. "Not because they have to, but because it's part of their story too. It explains so much about their grandparents, about the values we're trying to teach them, about why service and empathy matter so much in our family." Over the following days, William and Catherine discussed how and when to approach the conversation with their children. They decided to tell them together during one of their quiet family evenings when there would be no interruptions or external pressures. The opportunity came the following Sunday, after they'd returned from church and settled in for an afternoon at home. The children were relaxed and talkative, sharing stories about their friends and asking questions about the upcoming week's activities. Catherine began carefully, building on the gradual conversations she'd been having with them over recent weeks. "We've been talking about how families change and grow over time," she said, settling into the comfortable armchair where she often read to them when they were younger. "Today, I want to tell you something important about our family's history, something that happened before any of you were born, but that helps explain why certain things are so important to us." George, Charlotte, and Louis all gave her their attention, sensing that this was different from their usual casual conversations. Catherine felt her heart beating faster, but William's encouraging presence gave her the courage to continue. "When I was very young, before Grandpa Michael's business became successful, our family didn't have very much money," she began, choosing her words carefully to be honest without overwhelming them. "We lived in a small flat, and sometimes my parents worried about having enough money for food and other necessities." Charlotte's eyes widened slightly. "Like the families we visit at the food banks?" she asked, making the connection with their recent charitable work. "Exactly like that," Catherine confirmed, proud of her daughter's ability to understand the parallel. "My parents worked very hard, but sometimes even when people work hard, they still need help from others." George looked puzzled. "But why didn't you tell us before?" he asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Catherine had anticipated this question and had thought carefully about how to answer it honestly. "Because I wanted to wait until you were old enough to understand not just what happened, but why it matters," she explained. "Our family's experience with financial hardship taught us important lessons about helping others and never taking our current life for granted." Louis, who had been listening intently despite his young age, asked the question that Catherine had been both expecting and dreading. "Are we going to be poor too?" Catherine smiled gently and moved to sit beside him. "No, sweetheart. Our family is very fortunate now. But remembering what it was like when Grandpa and Grandma needed help reminds us why it's important to help other families who are going through similar challenges." The conversation continued for over an hour, with the children asking thoughtful questions and Catherine providing age-appropriate answers that satisfied their curiosity while building their understanding of empathy and social responsibility. William contributed by helping the children see connections between their mother's childhood experiences and the charitable work their family was involved in. He emphasized how Catherine's background made her more effective in her royal role, not less suited for it. As the afternoon progressed, Catherine realized that her fears about this conversation had been largely unfounded. Her children weren't shocked or upset by learning about their family's history of financial struggle. Instead, they seemed to find it interesting and meaningful, helping them understand why certain values were so emphasized in their household. George, in particular, seemed relieved to learn that his mother had faced real challenges and overcome them successfully. "So you know what it's like when things are hard," he said thoughtfully. "That's why you're good at helping people feel better when they're worried about things." Charlotte was fascinated by the practical aspects of the story, asking detailed questions about how her grandparents had managed to build their business and improve their family circumstances. Her questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect that impressed both parents. Louis, while not grasping all the complex implications, seemed to understand the basic message that families sometimes face difficulties but can work together to overcome them. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Catherine and William reflected on how the conversation had unfolded. Both felt satisfied that they'd handled the revelation appropriately, providing honesty without creating anxiety or insecurity. "I think Charlotte might become quite passionate about economic inequality," William observed with a smile. "She asked some very pointed questions about why some families have so much while others have so little." Catherine nodded, feeling proud of all three children's responses to learning about their family's more complex history. "I'm glad they know now," she said, feeling as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "It feels right that they understand the complete picture of where we came from. But Even as relief washed over her, Catherine knew that this conversation was just the beginning of helping her children understand the full implications of their unique position in the world. They would need ongoing guidance about how to use their privilege responsibly while staying connected to the experiences of families facing the kinds of challenges their own family had once navigated. The secret she'd carried for so long was no longer a burden, but the foundation for deeper conversations about service, empathy, and the responsibility that came with their extraordinary circumstances. 3 months after Catherine had shared her family's history with her children, the impact of that revelation was becoming evident in unexpected ways. The children's understanding of their mother's background had sparked new interests and deeper questions about social inequality, family resilience, and their own responsibilities as members of the royal family. George had begun asking to accompany Catherine on more of her charitable visits, particularly those involving families experiencing financial hardship. During a recent visit to a housing charity in London, he had surprised everyone with his thoughtful questions about the practical challenges facing families without stable housing. "When you were little, did you worry about having to move?" he asked Catherine quietly as they walked between temporary housing units. His question demonstrated a mature understanding that went beyond simple curiosity to genuine empathy for others in similar situations. Catherine had answered honestly, explaining how housing insecurity had been one of her family's biggest stresses during those difficult early years. "It taught me that having a safe place to call home is one of the most basic human needs," she told him. "That's why this kind of work is so important to me." Charlotte's response to learning about her mother's background had been characteristically direct and action-oriented. She had started a small savings project at school, encouraging her classmates to contribute coins for a local food bank. Her teacher had contacted Catherine to share how passionately Charlotte had explained the connection between her family's charitable work and her grandmother's own experience of needing help years ago. She told the class that her mummy understands what it's like when families worry about having enough food, the teacher had reported. It was remarkably mature for someone her age, and it made a real impression on the other children. Even young Lewis had absorbed important lessons from the family conversation. During a recent visit to see his grandparents in Bucklebury, he had asked Carol to show him the photo albums from when Catherine was his age. The pictures of their small flat and modest possessions had fascinated him, not because they seemed foreign or shocking, but because they helped him understand his family's journey. "Grandma, were you sad when you didn't have much money?" he had asked with characteristic directness. Carol had smiled and explained that while those times had been challenging, they had also brought the family closer together and taught them to appreciate what they had. "Some of our happiest memories came from that time," she had told him honestly, "because we learned that love and support matter more than money or fancy things." The conversation had prompted Catherine to have deeper discussions with her parents about their willingness to share more details about those early years with the grandchildren. Both Michael and Carol had expressed enthusiasm about being more open about their family's history, recognizing how it could help the children understand important values. "We're proud of how far we've come," Michael had told Catherine during a private conversation. "But we're also proud that those experiences taught us lessons that we've been able to pass on to you and now to the grandchildren." The media interest that Catherine had been concerned about had eventually materialized, but not in the sensational way she had feared. A respectful feature story had been published about her family's background, focusing on how their experiences had shaped her approach to charitable work and public service. Rather than treating her childhood poverty as a scandal or embarrassment, the coverage had emphasized how those experiences had prepared her for her current role and made her more effective in connecting with people from diverse backgrounds. Public response had been overwhelmingly positive, with many people expressing appreciation for her honesty and authenticity. Letters had poured into Kensington Palace from families who felt a new connection to Catherine after learning about her background. Parents wrote about feeling understood and represented by someone who truly comprehended the challenges of financial insecurity and the importance of community support. "Your story gives hope to families like ours," one letter read. "It shows our children that difficult times don't define your future, and that success means remembering where you came from and helping others along the way. Catherine had been moved by the response, realizing that her decision to be transparent about her family's history had created opportunities for deeper connections with the people she served. Her secret, once a source of anxiety and uncertainty, had become a bridge to greater understanding and empathy. The annual summer garden party at Buckingham Palace provided an opportunity to see how the revelation had affected the children's interactions with guests from various backgrounds. Catherine watched with pride as George engaged in thoughtful conversations with representatives from homelessness charities, asking informed questions that demonstrated genuine interest and understanding. Charlotte had sought out guests involved in educational programs for disadvantaged children, sharing her own experiences with learning about economic inequality and expressing enthusiasm for supporting such initiatives. Her confidence and passion impressed everyone she spoke with, including several senior royal family members who commended Catherine on her daughter's remarkable maturity. Louis, while still too young for complex discussions about social issues, had shown increased interest in charitable activities and frequently asked about the families they visited during official engagements. His natural empathy seemed heightened by his growing understanding of his family's history. During a quiet moment at the garden party, Queen Camilla approached Catherine with unexpected words of appreciation. "The children's understanding of service has deepened remarkably," she observed. "They seem to grasp not just the importance of charitable work, but the personal connections that make it meaningful." Catherine thanked her for the observation, reflecting on how sharing her secret had indeed transformed her children's relationship with their royal responsibilities. Rather than seeing charitable work as an obligation or duty, they were beginning to understand it as a natural extension of family values rooted in real experience. As the summer progressed, Catherine found herself having more sophisticated conversations with her children about social justice, economic inequality, and their future roles in addressing these challenges. The foundation of honesty she had established by sharing her family's history created space for discussions that might have seemed abstract or theoretical without that personal connection. "When I'm older," George told her during a car ride to a youth mentoring program, "I want to focus on helping families who are going through what Grandpa and Grandma went through. I think I could understand what they need better because I know it's real." His comment highlighted exactly what Catherine had hoped would emerge from sharing their family's story. Not pity or condescension toward those in need, but genuine understanding and a sense of personal connection to the work of addressing social challenges. Charlotte had expressed interest in learning more about her grandfather's business journey, wanting to understand how families could build stability and success from difficult circumstances. "I want to know about different ways people can improve their situations," she explained to Catherine. "Not everyone can start a business, so what else works?" These conversations led Catherine to arrange educational visits and meetings that would help her children understand various approaches to addressing poverty and economic inequality. They visited social enterprises, met with policy experts, and learned about successful community programs that were making real differences in people's lives. As autumn approached and the children prepared to return to school after summer holidays, Catherine reflected on the transformation that had occurred since she first shared her secret at the Royal Variety Show. What had begun as a personal burden had evolved into a family strength that was shaping the next generation's understanding of service and responsibility. The journalist's questions that had initially caused her anxiety now seemed like a catalyst that had pushed her toward a conversation that needed to happen anyway. Her children were demonstrating daily that they had been ready for this truth and were using it to develop more meaningful relationships with their future responsibilities. William often commented on how much more confident and authentic Catherine seemed in her public role since sharing their family story. "You're not carrying that weight anymore," he observed. "It shows in everything you do. You're more connected to people because you're not hiding part of yourself." Catherine knew he was right. The secret she had carried for so long had been not just about protecting her children, but about protecting herself from potential judgment or misunderstanding. Releasing that burden had freed her to be more fully present in her role and more genuinely connected to the people she served. Looking toward the future, Catherine felt optimistic about her children's developing understanding of their unique position in the world. They were learning to see their privilege not as something to feel guilty about, but as a tool for creating positive change and supporting others facing challenges their own family had once navigated. The personal had become political in the best possible way, and Catherine's secret had transformed from a source of anxiety into a foundation for meaningful service and authentic leadership that would serve her children well throughout their lives.